The sun goes down over the Thames in the middle of October, somewhere around the year 1300, at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon. By 5 o'clock it is dark, not the partial, orange-tinged dark of a modern city at night, but the complete, physical darkness of a pre-industrial city without gas lamps, without electric light, without anything between the population and the absence of the sun except fire. The city that was loud and crowded and navigable at 3 in the afternoon becomes, at 5, a different place entirely, governed by different rules, populated by different people, and dangerous in ways that the daylight hours are not. This is medieval London after dark, and it was, depending entirely on who you were and what you were doing, either the most vivid few hours of your day or the last few hours of your life. Start with the curfew, because the curfew defined everything. The curfew bell, curfew from the French couvre-feu, cover the fire, rang at dusk from the churches of London, and its practical meaning was twofold. Bank your hearth fire against the risk of the house fires that periodically destroyed entire neighborhoods of the densely packed wooden city, and get off the street. The curfew was not a suggestion. It was law, enforced by the watch, the men whose job it was to patrol the streets between dusk and dawn, and whose authority included the detention of anyone found abroad, without a good account of themselves. The watch was not the police in any modern sense. It was a rotating civic obligation, served by men of the ward who were required to take their turn, and who brought to the job varying degrees of competence, sobriety, and commitment. The chronicles of medieval London are full of complaints about the watch, sleeping, drunk, absent, extorting money from the people they were supposed to be protecting. They were also, in the aggregate, a genuine deterrent, because the alternative to the watch was no deterrent at all, and the streets of medieval London after dark, without any authority, were a geography of risk that the city's population understood and mostly respected. Who was on the streets after curfew then? The answer is more varied than the curfew's authority suggests, because the curfew, like most medieval law, was applied with a selectivity that tracked social position more than actual behavior. The wealthy could be abroad after dark with a reasonable expectation of being left alone, provided they carried a torch. The torch was the visible mark of legitimate nocturnal movement, the signal to the watch that the person carrying it had resources, and presumably reasons, and moved with the purposeful bearing of a man who belonged wherever he was going. The clergy moved freely. The clergy were subject to their own law, their own courts, their own disciplinary mechanisms, and the watch's jurisdiction over a canon who was out after Compline was a jurisdictional question that most watch members preferred not to test. Servants on legitimate errands for wealthy households moved with the authority of their employers' names behind them. Midwives moved at any hour, because birth did not respect the curfew bell, and the network of women who attended births in medieval London operated through the night with a practical immunity that no authority seriously contested. The taverns were the engine of medieval London's nightlife, and they operated in a relationship with the curfew that was best described as negotiated. Officially, taverns were required to close at curfew. In practice, the closing of a tavern in medieval London was a process that began when the landlord decided it was time, and ended when the last drinker could be persuaded to leave, and the official closing time was a starting point for that negotiation, rather than its conclusion. The London Assize of Ole, which regulated the sale of ale in the city, was enforced by ale tasters, civic officials who checked quality and measure. But its enforcement of closing hours was the aspect of the trade regulation that the records show being violated most consistently. What happened in a medieval London tavern after dark was a compression of the social life that the daylight hours distributed across the entire city into a single, fire-lit, alcohol-lubricated space. The tavern had no furniture in the modern pub sense. Benches along the walls, trestle tables, rushes on the floor that absorbed the spillage and the mud and everything else that accumulated in the space used heavily by people who had come in from unpaved streets. The ale was warm and flat and strong by modern standards, brewed locally, sold by the landlord, or more often by the landlord's wife, who in many London households was the primary operator of the business. Ice games, card games when cards arrived in England in the late 14th century, the particular gambling that medieval Londoners conducted on everything from wrestling matches to the outcome of legal cases. All of this concentrated in the tavern after dark. The church disapproved. The city authorities issued periodic ordinances against gaming in taverns. The periodic ordinances against gaming in taverns were ignored.